Wilderness doesn't need warning signs. Danger can appear in a breath, in fog, in silence. A single scent trail or careless step can turn ordinary moments into sudden chaos. Survival depends on distance, awareness, and seconds that vanish fast. From a whiteout tourist disaster to a Kodiak RV collapse, a rural bus stop, mountain tracking, a risky selfie, and a suburban backyard shock, these stories reveal harsh lessons. In this video, we'll uncover 6 chilling encounters, 6 real scenarios explored clearly, with safety takeaways that matter. The Svalbard Archipelago, situated deep within the Arctic Circle between mainland Norway and the North Pole, had long attracted adventurers seeking glimpses of untouched polar wilderness. By January 2026, tourism operators had established careful protocols for winter expeditions across sea ice, though conditions remained inherently unpredictable. The territory's polar bear population, estimated at over 3,000 individuals, moved freely across frozen seascapes in search of seals, their primary prey. Human encounters remained statistically rare, but carried severe consequences when they occurred. On January 17, 2026, guide Lars Eide assembled a small group of tourists for a daytime snowmobile expedition along established routes near the western coast. The 45-year-old Norwegian had led similar trips for 6 years without major incident. His clients that morning included Karen Vogel, a German landscape photographer aged 44, Thomas Breen, a 51-year-old Irish civil engineer, Elise Martin, a 34-year-old French researcher on sabbatical, and Jonah Price, a 28-year-old American biology teacher hoping to document Arctic ecosystems. Weather forecasts had predicted light winds and partial visibility, acceptable conditions for experienced operators. The group departed their lodge shortly after 10 in the morning, when twilight provided a few hours of usable light. Each traveler wore insulated expedition gear and rode their own snowmobile, equipped with emergency flares and satellite beacons. Lars carried a rifle chambered for large game, standard equipment for any Arctic excursion. The first 2 hours proceeded without concern. The group followed familiar terrain markers across wind-packed snow, stopping periodically for photographs and navigation checks. Sea ice extended in all directions, its surface broken by pressure ridges where tectonic forces had pushed slabs into jagged formations. These ridges provided shelter for seals and occasionally attracted hunting bears, though Lars maintained safe distances from such features. Around noon, the group approached a particularly prominent pressure ridge, roughly 3 kilometers from the settlement. Lars intended to use the elevated position for a bearing check before turning back. As the snowmobiles slowed near the base of the ridge, conditions shifted abruptly. Wind gusts from the north intensified, carrying dense clouds of surface snow that reduced visibility to mere meters within seconds. The temperature, already well below freezing, plummeted further. Lars raised his hand to signal a halt, while he assessed whether to proceed or retreat immediately. The 5 snowmobiles clustered together in the whiteout, engines idling. Karen dismounted briefly to adjust her goggles. Thomas remained seated, checking his GPS unit. Elise and Jonah stayed close to Lars, waiting for instructions. What happened next occurred with devastating speed. A massive male polar bear, later estimated at over 500 kilograms, emerged from behind the pressure ridge at a full charge. The animal had likely been resting in a sheltered depression, invisible until it moved. Polar bears could sprint across ice at speeds exceeding 30 kilometers per hour in short bursts, and this individual closed the distance to the group in seconds. The sudden appearance triggered panic. Several snowmobiles stalled as riders attempted simultaneous starts in deep drifted snow that had accumulated around their tracks. Lars swung his rifle from his shoulder while shouting warnings, though the wind muffled his voice. He fired a shot into the air, hoping the noise might deter the animal, but the bear showed no hesitation. The bear struck Karen first. She had been standing beside her snowmobile and had no time to remount or flee. The impact knocked her completely off her feet. Lars fired again, this time aiming near the bear, but snow spray and movement made accurate shooting nearly impossible. Thomas attempted to accelerate away, but his machine lurched sideways into a drift, throwing him partially off balance. Lars made a split-second decision to draw the bear's attention. He advanced on foot, firing and shouting, trying to position himself between the animal and the scattered tourists. The tactic worked briefly. The bear turned toward Lars, who continued backing toward open ice while maintaining noise. He screamed for the others to scatter and escape on their machines. Jonah, driven by pure survival instinct, managed to restart his snowmobile and accelerate down the slope away from the immediate chaos. His machine bounced over uneven ice before he steered behind a cluster of large ice blocks, perhaps 50 meters from the main group. He killed his engine and crouched low, watching through gaps in the ice. What Jonah witnessed over the following minutes would haunt him permanently. The bear, despite Lars's efforts, returned to the other tourists with focused aggression. The combination of stalled machines, poor visibility, and deep snow prevented coordinated escape. Lars continued attempting to intervene, firing his remaining rounds, but the bear moved between targets with frightening efficiency. The attack lasted approximately 4 minutes before the bear retreated toward the pressure ridge and eventually disappeared toward open water. Jonah remained hidden for several additional minutes, paralyzed by shock and terror, before cautiously approaching the scene. All 3 of his companions and their guide lay motionless in the snow. Their snowmobiles sat scattered and silent. Jonah activated his emergency beacon and attempted to use a satellite phone, though his hands shook violently from both cold and trauma. Rescue helicopters reached the location within 90 minutes, guided by beacon signals. Medical personnel confirmed that Lars, Karen, Thomas, and Elise had all succumbed to their injuries. Jonah had sustained severe frostbite on his fingers and toes from prolonged exposure and remained in deep psychological shock. Investigators later determined that the confluence of sudden weather deterioration, terrain features that concealed the bear, and mechanical difficulties with snowmobiles had created conditions with virtually no survivable options once the attack began. The bear itself was never located or identified specifically. Jonah spent weeks in medical treatment and returned to the United States profoundly changed by the experience. Kodiak Island, located in the Gulf of Alaska, approximately 50 kilometers off the mainland coast, is recognized as home to the world's largest brown bears. By September 2020, the island's bear population had exceeded 3,000, with adult males often weighing more than 600 kilograms. The bear's massive size resulted from abundant salmon runs and dense berry patches that flourished in the island's temperate rainforest climate. Human-bear interactions remained relatively uncommon, but posed inherent risks, particularly in autumn, when bears intensified feeding before winter dormancy. On September 21, 2020, travelers Caspian Rowe and Elodie Marsh arrived at a remote coastal pullout on Kodiak's southwestern shore. The 57-year-old retired accountant and the 53-year-old graphic designer had spent 2 weeks exploring Alaska in their recreational vehicle, documenting wildlife and landscapes. They had selected this particular overnight spot for its scenic overlook of a tidal inlet, where seals occasionally hauled out on exposed rocks. Heavy rains had persisted throughout the previous week, saturating hillside berry patches and pushing wildlife toward lower elevations and road corridors in search of accessible food. The couple parked their 30-foot RV with its slide-out extended, creating additional interior space for their sleeping area and kitchenette. They stored their coolers and food containers in external compartments beneath the extended section, a common practice among RV travelers. The evening passed quietly. Caspian and Elodie prepared dinner, reviewed photographs from earlier in their trip, and settled in for the night around 10 o'clock. Rain continued drumming against the RV's roof and windows, creating white noise that masked external sounds. No other vehicles occupied the pullout, leaving them isolated several kilometers from the nearest residence. Shortly after 11 o'clock, Elodie woke to unusual sounds beneath the RV. Metallic scraping and heavy breathing suggested something large was investigating their storage compartments. She roused Caspian, who listened carefully before moving to a window. In the darkness and rain, he could barely distinguish a massive shape near the slide-out mechanism. The Kodiak bear had likely detected food odors from the coolers, despite their sealed containers. The animal began pawing aggressively at the compartment doors, its strength easily bending lightweight aluminum panels. Caspian realized the bear's activity might damage their slide-out mechanism or even compromise the RV's structural integrity. He made the critical decision to step outside and manually retract the slide-out, hoping the movement and his presence would frighten the bear away. He pulled on a rain jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and opened the side door while calling out loudly to announce his presence. The beam of his flashlight caught reflective eyes and a truly enormous bear standing partially upright beside the RV. Caspian moved quickly toward the slide-out controls, continuing to shout and wave his flashlight. The bear initially shifted away slightly but did not flee. As Caspian reached the control panel and began the retraction sequence, the mechanical whirring apparently startled the animal into action. The bear surged forward with unexpected speed, slamming its full weight against the slide-out section just as it began moving inward. The impact completely buckled the slide-out mechanism. Metal supports collapsed, and the entire extended section crashed inward at an angle, catching Caspian between the moving structure and the RV's main frame. He fell hard onto wet gravel as the bear continued pushing forward, tearing at insulation panels and storage bins with its claws and teeth. The bear bit down on Caspian's calf, its massive jaws creating deep puncture wounds through his jeans and into muscle tissue. He screamed and tried to pull away, but the animal maintained its grip while using a front paw to rake across his forearm, opening long gashes. The bear seemed focused on accessing the food storage rather than Caspian himself, but its size and strength made the distinction irrelevant. Inside the RV, Elodie responded immediately. She blasted the horn continuously, creating a sustained loud noise that echoed off nearby trees. She simultaneously activated all exterior floodlights and the vehicle's emergency flasher. The sudden sensory overload of sound and light caused the bear to pause its assault. A neighboring camper in a small tent roughly 100 meters away had also been awakened by the commotion. The individual started their pickup truck's engine and revved it repeatedly while honking the horn. The combined cacophony of RV horn, lights, and truck engine finally convinced the bear to disengage. The animal released Caspian and retreated several steps, shaking its head at the noise. It stood briefly on its hind legs, reaching nearly 3 meters in height, before dropping to all fours and lumbering away into the brush along the inlet's edge. Within seconds, the darkness and rain swallowed it completely. Elodie rushed outside to pull Caspian away from the damaged RV. His calf showed deep bite wounds with significant bleeding, and his forearm bore multiple lacerations. The neighboring camper arrived with a first aid kit and helped apply pressure bandages while Elodie used a satellite phone to call emergency services. A rescue helicopter reached their location within 2 hours, navigating difficult weather conditions. Caspian was transported to a hospital where he underwent surgery for bite wounds, muscle damage, and fractured bones in his leg. He survived, but required months of physical therapy. Subsequent investigations identified mechanical noise, food storage directly beneath the living space, and the narrow pullouts limited escape options as factors that had created an unusually dangerous situation. The Amur region of southeastern Russia spanned vast taiga forests, agricultural plains, and small industrial settlements near the Chinese border. By November 2024, the region's brown bear population had expanded notably due to conservation efforts and reduced hunting pressure. These bears, comparable in size to North American grizzlies, typically avoided human settlements, but occasionally ventured into populated areas when natural food sources diminished before winter. The town of Zvetinsk, with approximately 12,000 residents, served as a regional center for factories and agricultural processing facilities. On November 4, 2024, Temperatures in Zavitinsk dropped well below freezing as winter set in. Dawn arrived late at this latitude, leaving early morning commuters waiting in darkness at scattered bus stops throughout the town's outskirts. One such stop, located along the main road leading to the industrial district, consisted of a simple three-sided metal shelter with a bench and dim overhead light. Several food kiosks operated near this bus stop during daytime hours, serving workers traveling to and from their shifts. The previous evening, one kiosk operator had stacked plastic trash bags containing food waste outside the building rather than securing them in proper containers. Overnight, these bags had attracted scavengers, including a particularly large male brown bear that had wandered into town from the surrounding forests. Denis Karpov, a 43-year-old factory worker, arrived at the bus stop shortly before 6 in the morning. He had worked the overnight maintenance shift and waited for the early bus home. He was soon joined by Irina Malisheva, a 51-year-old school teacher preparing for her morning commute, and Viktor Sazonov, a 19-year-old college student heading to classes in a neighboring town. The three commuters stood or sat in the shelter, stamping their feet against the cold and watching for headlights in the distance. Frost coated every surface, and their breath formed clouds in the frigid air. The nearby trash bags had been torn open, their contents scattered across frozen ground, but the commuters paid little attention to this common sight. The bear had actually remained in the immediate vicinity throughout the night, feeding intermittently on the accessible garbage. When the humans arrived, the animal had been resting behind a large snowbank approximately 30 meters from the shelter. The combination of darkness, wind direction, and the bear's stillness had prevented the commuters from detecting its presence. As the headlights in the distance signaled the approaching bus, the three people gathered their belongings and moved toward the edge of the road. This movement apparently triggered a response from the bear. The massive animal emerged from behind the snowbank at a full charge, its dark form nearly invisible against the pre-dawn darkness until it crossed beneath the shelter's weak light. Denis reacted first, attempting to run across the road toward the opposite side. His boot struck a patch of black ice invisible in the dim light, and his feet slid out from under him. He crashed hard onto the pavement directly in the bear's path. The animal was upon him within seconds, using its weight and claws to pin him against the frozen ground. Irina and Viktor fled in opposite directions, both screaming warnings at the approaching bus. Irina ran diagonally across the road, waving her bag frantically and shouting for the driver to stop. Viktor sprinted toward the kiosk buildings, turning back periodically to assess the situation while yelling at full volume. The bear focused its attack on Denis with horrifying efficiency. The animal bit repeatedly at his torso and neck, while using its front paws to maintain control. Denis struggled initially, but his movements weakened rapidly. The assault lasted perhaps 15 seconds before the bear suddenly grabbed Denis by his jacket and began dragging him away from the shelter toward the tree line beyond the road. The bus driver, alerted by Irina's frantic warnings, brought the vehicle to a complete stop approximately 50 meters from the shelter. The headlights illuminated the scene with stark clarity. The driver immediately radioed emergency services while keeping the bus doors closed and the engine running. Several passengers pressed against windows, witnessing the attack but unable to intervene safely. The approaching traffic and increased human activity finally convinced the bear to abandon its victim. The animal released Denis near the edge of the tree line and retreated into the forest with remarkable speed for something so large. Within moments, it had disappeared completely into the darkness and dense vegetation. Irina and Viktor cautiously approached Denis after confirming the bear had departed. Even in the poor light, they could see he had sustained catastrophic injuries. The bus driver emerged with a first aid kit, but Denis showed no signs of consciousness or breathing. Viktor used his mobile phone to provide additional details to emergency dispatchers, while Irina attempted to keep Denis warm with her coat. Emergency medical services arrived within 8 minutes, followed shortly by local police. Paramedics confirmed that Denis had succumbed to his injuries, likely within the first minute of the attack. The severity and location of his wounds had made survival impossible even with immediate medical intervention. Authorities evacuated the area and established a temporary perimeter while wildlife officers searched for the bear. The animal was never located that morning, having retreated deep into the surrounding taiga. Investigators examining the scene found torn trash bags and scattered food waste, concluding that improper garbage storage had attracted the bear into an area normally avoided by humans. The attack generated significant attention throughout the region, prompting immediate changes to waste management protocols in Zavatinsk and surrounding communities. The combination of early morning darkness, accessible food waste attractants, and the unusually public setting had created circumstances that witnesses described as nightmarish and completely unexpected. Irina and Victor both required psychological counseling following the incident, struggling to process what they had witnessed in those chaotic pre-dawn moments. The Carpathian Mountains stretched across central Romania in vast arcs of forested slopes, limestone peaks, and isolated valleys. By November 2023, Romania had the largest brown bear population in Europe outside Russia, with estimates exceeding 6,000 individuals distributed across mountain regions. These bears thrived in dense, mixed forests of beech, fir, and spruce, which provided abundant food and minimal human disturbance. Local hunting traditions remained strong in rural communities, where wild boar and deer hunting supplemented household incomes and food supplies. On November 6, 2023, 3 experienced hunters departed from a small village in the foothills to track wild boar along newly established snowlines. Lucian Moraru, a 44-year-old forestry worker, had hunted these mountains since childhood. Petru Iancu, a 39-year-old carpenter, and Doran Balaz, a 31-year-old agricultural equipment mechanic, accompanied him. All 3 men carried licensed hunting rifles and had completed the required safety training. The previous night's snowfall had deposited approximately 15 centimeters at elevations above 1,000 meters, creating ideal tracking conditions. Fresh snow clearly revealed animal movements, and hunters could follow trails to locate game. However, unseasonably warm temperatures that morning had begun melting the snow layer, creating humid conditions and soft ground that muffled sounds. The hunters entered the forest around 7 in the morning, hiking upslope through mixed deciduous trees before transitioning into denser conifer stands. They moved in a loose formation, spaced 20 to 30 meters apart, scanning for boar tracks and droppings. The melting snow created a constant drip from the branches overhead, masking the usual auditory cues that warned of nearby animals. Around 10 o'clock, Lucian spotted promising boar tracks leading into a particularly dense section of fir trees. The prints appeared fresh, pressed deeply into wet snow with clear hoof definition. He signaled to his companions and began following the trail alone, while Petru and Doran circled to potential exit routes, a standard tactic for cornering game. Lucian moved carefully between closely spaced trees, his rifle held ready across his chest. The tracks led through increasingly dense vegetation, where low-hanging branches and young saplings formed natural barriers. Visibility dropped to just a few meters in any direction. The melting snow beneath his boots provided nearly silent footing, allowing him to advance without alerting potential game. What Lucian failed to recognize was that the boar tracks had intersected with a brown bear's movement corridor. The bear, a large adult estimated later at over 200 kilograms, had been resting in a natural depression beneath a fallen fir tree. The location provided shelter from the wind and insulation from the cold ground. Bears in this region typically entered winter dormancy in November, but this individual had remained active, likely due to the mild autumn weather. Lucian crossed directly onto the bear's resting site without warning. The dense vegetation and the snow's silence prevented him from seeing or hearing the animal until it exploded from beneath the fallen tree at point-blank range. The bear's charge covered perhaps 3 meters before making contact, giving Lucian no time to raise his rifle or retreat. The impact knocked Lucian completely off his feet. He crashed backward into snow and leaf litter, his rifle flying from his hands. The bear immediately bit down on his right thigh, its massive jaws creating deep puncture wounds through heavy canvas hunting pants and into muscle tissue. Lucian screamed in pain and terror, the sound finally alerting his distant companions. The bear maintained its grip on Lucian's leg while using its front paws to pin his torso against the ground. The animal's hot breath and overwhelming strength left Lucian helpless to resist. He could smell wet fur and decaying vegetation as the bear positioned itself over him, apparently trying to neutralize what it perceived as a threat. Petru heard Lucian's screams from approximately 40 meters away. He crashed through the undergrowth toward the sound, shouting warnings to announce his approach. When he reached a position where he could partially see the attack through the trees, he made the split-second decision to fire a warning shot. He deliberately aimed into the snow several meters from the bear, hoping the noise and impact would startle the animal without risking a hit on Lucian. The rifle shot cracked through the forest with sharp authority. Snow and soil erupted where the bullet struck. The bear immediately released Lucian's leg and swung its head toward this new stimulus. Doran arrived from another direction, climbing hastily onto a fallen log to gain elevation, while waving his jacket and shouting at maximum volume. The combined noise and movement from multiple directions apparently convinced the bear that it faced various threats. The animal backed away from Lucian, pausing briefly to swing its head between the multiple sources of commotion. Then it turned and crashed upslope through the fir trees, moving with surprising speed despite its bulk. Within seconds, the sound of breaking branches faded as the bear retreated deeper into the forest. Petru and Doran rushed to Lucian's side. He remained conscious but had entered shock, shaking uncontrollably and unable to stand. His right thigh showed severe bite wounds with arterial bleeding that soaked through his torn pants. Petru immediately removed his belt and created a tourniquet above the wound, while Doran called emergency services using a mobile phone. The location's remoteness complicated rescue efforts. The hunters were positioned roughly 3 kilometers from the nearest road accessible to vehicles. Petru and Doran fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches and Lucian's jacket, then began carrying him down the slope toward the rendezvous point they had established with emergency responders. A rescue team reached them approximately 90 minutes after the initial call. Paramedics stabilized Lucian's leg and administered intravenous fluids before transporting him to a regional hospital. He had lost significant blood and required immediate surgery to repair damaged muscles and blood vessels. The attack had narrowly missed his femoral artery, which likely saved his life. Lucian survived, but faced months of physical therapy to regain full mobility in his leg. Subsequent investigations by wildlife authorities concluded that the combination of silent terrain from melting snow, overlapping animal tracks, and the bear's unexpected presence in a resting site had created an encounter with virtually no warning. The late hunting season had also pushed both humans and bears into similar elevation zones, as animals prepared for winter and hunters pursued last opportunities before seasonal closures. The mountain ranges of western Montana contain some of North America's most pristine grizzly bear habitat, with populations gradually recovering from historical declines. By July 2025, wildlife biologists estimated that several hundred grizzlies roamed remote wilderness areas, feeding on seasonal foods such as berries, roots, and occasional carrion. These bears generally avoided human contact, but summer hiking traffic increased the risk of encounters, particularly in subalpine zones, where berry patches attracted both wildlife and photographers seeking scenic vistas. On July 30th, 2025, hikers Arlo Whitestone and Bryn Callahan tackled a challenging trail leading to high-elevation ridgelines. The 28-year-old software developer and the 25-year-old graduate student had driven from their homes in Missoula specifically to access this remote trailhead. Both considered themselves experienced hikers, though neither had previous direct experience with grizzly bears in the wild. The July weather provided ideal hiking conditions, with clear skies and moderate temperatures. The pair started their ascent around 8 in the morning, climbing steadily through lodgepole pine forests before emerging above the tree line into open alpine meadows. Wildflowers bloomed in brilliant patches across the slopes, and occasional marmots whistled warnings from boulder fields. After approximately 4 hours of hiking, Arlo and Bryn reached a prominent scree ridge, offering panoramic views across a subalpine basin below. Scree consisted of loose rock fragments, ranging from pebble-sized to larger than fists, accumulated on steep slopes through centuries of freeze-thaw weathering. The footing remained unstable, with rocks shifting under weight and occasionally triggering small slides. While pausing to rest and hydrate, Bryn spotted movement in the basin roughly 100 meters below their position. A large grizzly bear, identifiable by its prominent shoulder hump and dished facial profile, was feeding methodically on late summer huckleberries that grew in dense patches among the rocks. The bear appeared completely absorbed in feeding, using its claws to strip berries from branches. Arlo immediately reached for his phone, excited by the opportunity to document a wild grizzly. He had been posting hiking photos to social media throughout their trip and recognized this as a potentially viral image. He suggested moving closer to the ridge, where he could capture both the bear and the dramatic mountain backdrop in a single selfie. Bryn expressed hesitation, recalling bear safety guidelines that recommended maintaining a significant distance. Arlo dismissed the concern, arguing that the bear was far below them and clearly preoccupied with feeding. He moved carefully toward the ridge's edge, stepping across loose scree while holding his phone at arm's length to frame the shot. What Arlo failed to appreciate was how sound traveled across the basin's bowl-shaped geography. The amphitheater effect amplified and focused sounds from above, making them seem much closer to the animals below than the actual distance would suggest. Additionally, the loose scree magnified even small movements as each footstep triggered minor rock slides. As Arlo positioned himself for the photograph, he shifted his weight to better frame the shot. His boot displaced several fist-sized rocks that tumbled downslope, colliding with other stones and creating a cascade effect. The rattling clatter of stone on stone echoed across the basin with surprising volume. The grizzly's head snapped up immediately. The bear stared directly upslope toward the source of the disturbance, evaluating the situation. For several seconds, it remained motionless. Then, apparently perceiving a threat or challenge, the bear began charging uphill. Grizzlies could climb steep terrain with shocking speed despite their bulk. This individual covered the slope in powerful bounds, using its claws to grip rock and vegetation while maintaining momentum. The bear closed the vertical distance far faster than Arlo had thought possible. Bryn screamed a warning as the bear approached. Arlo turned to retreat, but immediately discovered the fundamental problem with scree slopes. His boots found no purchase on the loose rocks. His first backward step triggered a slide beneath his feet, and he tumbled sideways, dropping his phone as he tried to regain balance. He fell roughly 3 meters down the slope, landing hard on his side and sliding further on loose stone. The grizzly reached Arlo within seconds of his fall. The bear struck him with a powerful swipe of its front paw, the force rolling him across the unstable surface. Then it bit down on his exposed forearm, its teeth puncturing through his light hiking shirt and into flesh. Arlo's backpack partially cushioned a second bite, the bear's jaws tearing through nylon fabric and crushing a water bladder inside. Bryn reacted with desperate improvisation. She grabbed her metal water bottle from her pack's side pocket and hurled it with all her strength. The bottle struck a rock near the bear's head with a loud metallic clang that rang out across the basin. The unexpected noise so close caused the bear to release Arlo's arm and swing toward the new stimulus. Bryn immediately threw a second object, her hiking pole, which clattered loudly against the rocks. She continued screaming and waving her arms as she slowly backed away from the immediate area. The bear stood briefly on its hind legs, reaching a height of over 2 meters, apparently reassessing the situation. After several tense seconds, the bear dropped back to all fours and retreated downslope. It moved quickly but not in panicked flight, occasionally glancing back toward the ridge as it descended. The animal soon disappeared into the brush at the basin's lower edge, leaving Arlo bleeding on the scree slope. Bryn carefully approached Arlo, mindful of triggering another rock slide. He remained conscious, but had entered shock, breathing rapidly and unable to stand. His right forearm showed deep bite wounds with significant bleeding, and he complained of severe pain in his ribs where the bear's initial swipe had connected. His backpack hung in shreds from one shoulder. Bryn activated an emergency locator beacon they carried for such contingencies. She then used their remaining water to clean Arlo's wounds as much as possible and created makeshift bandages from her spare shirt. The scree slope's instability prevented her from doing much more without risking further injury to both of them. A rescue helicopter reached their position within 2 hours, guided by the beacon's coordinates. The crew lowered a medic on a cable, who stabilized Arlo before lifting him into the aircraft. He was transported to a trauma center, where he underwent surgery for bite wounds, a fractured radius, and 2 broken ribs. Arlo survived the encounter but faced months of recovery and permanent scarring on his forearm. Subsequent review of the incident by park authorities identified multiple dangerous factors, including deliberate proximity to wildlife, unstable footing that prevented effective retreat, and acoustic amplification that triggered the bear's defensive response. The incident served as a cautionary example of how seemingly safe wildlife viewing can deteriorate into a life-threatening situation when proper distance and terrain awareness are not maintained. The suburban woodlands of Connecticut had experienced steady expansion of black bear populations throughout the early 21st century. By June 2022, wildlife officials estimated over 1,000 bears inhabited the state's forested regions, with increasing numbers venturing into residential areas during summer months when natural food sources fluctuated. These bears, typically weighing between 100 and 200 kilograms, generally avoided confrontation with humans, but showed remarkable adaptability to suburban environments where garbage, birdseed, and fruit trees provided easy calories. On June 22, 2022, homeowner Percival Alden surveyed storm damage in his backyard following overnight severe weather. The 61-year-old retired insurance adjuster lived in a wooded subdivision where half-acre lots backed onto protected forest land. His property featured mature trees, landscaped gardens, and a large trampoline that his grandchildren used during summer visits. The previous night's thunderstorms had produced high winds that scattered debris across the neighborhood. Percival's backyard trampoline had been partially flipped, with safety netting torn loose and tangled around the metal frame. A cherry tree near the property line had dropped substantial quantities of fruit, which had fermented rapidly in the June heat over the past several days. Percival stepped outside around 9 in the morning to assess the damage and begin cleanup. The temperature had already climbed into the mid-20s Celsius with high humidity that made the air feel thick and oppressive. He wore lightweight work clothes and canvas gloves, carrying wire cutters to remove the damaged netting from the trampoline frame. The backyard appeared quiet and undisturbed, apart from scattered branches and leaves. Percival did not indicate that wildlife had visited overnight. However, the fermented cherries had actually attracted various animals, including raccoons, opossums, and one particularly large black bear that had climbed over the fence around 3 in the morning. The bear, an adult male estimated at approximately 150 kilograms, had gorged on the fermented fruit for several hours before retreating to a sheltered area behind the property's storage shed. The combination of heat and the alcohol consumed during fermenting fruit had left the animal lethargic, yet irritable, seeking shade rather than returning immediately to the forest. Percival approached the trampoline and began pulling at the tangled netting. The metal frame had twisted slightly from the wind's force, and the springs creaked as he worked to free the torn material. He cut through several zip ties and pulled loose fabric away from the springs, focused entirely on the task at hand. The black bear emerged from behind the shed with startling suddenness. The animal had apparently been disturbed by the metallic sounds of Percival working on the trampoline frame. Bears possessed excellent hearing, and the unfamiliar noises likely triggered a defensive response in the bear's disoriented state. The animal charged across the lawn, covering the distance from the shed to the trampoline in seconds. Percival had his back turned and received no warning until the bear was nearly upon him. He spun around at the sound of heavy footfalls and saw the bear rushing directly toward him with its ears laid back. Percival stumbled backward reflexively, his boots catching on the trampoline's edge. He fell onto the elastic mat, which immediately sagged under his weight, creating an unstable platform. His legs became partially entangled in the loose netting he had been removing, trapping him in an awkward position with limited mobility. The bear lunged forward without hesitation. It bit down on Percival's left calf, its teeth penetrating through his jeans and into muscle tissue. Percival screamed in pain and tried to kick free with his other leg, but the sagging trampoline mat provided no solid surface to push against. Every movement caused the elastic surface to flex and bounce, preventing him from generating effective force. The bear maintained its grip while using a front paw to swipe at Percival's arms and torso. Claws raked across his forearm, opening long gashes through his shirt. The metal trampoline frame squealed and flexed as the combined weight of man and bear stressed the already damaged structure. Springs popped loose from their moorings, adding sharp metallic pings to the chaos. Percival's neighbor, Marlo Jensen, was working in her garden 2 properties away when she heard the screaming. The 47-year-old nurse immediately recognized the sound of genuine distress. She ran toward Percival's yard while pulling out her phone, arriving at the fence line with a clear view of the attack in progress. Marlo made a rapid assessment of the situation. She was too far away and separated by a fence to physically intervene without putting herself at extreme risk. Instead, she ran to her driveway, where her car was parked, and activated the vehicle's alarm. The horn blared in loud, rhythmic pulses as lights flashed. Simultaneously, Marlo began shouting at the top of her lungs from her second-story bedroom window, which she reached by running back inside and upstairs. She leaned out the window, continuing to scream and wave her arms, while the car alarm maintained its cacophony below. The sudden, overwhelming noise appeared to confuse the bear. The animal released Percival's leg and lifted its head, swinging back and forth to locate the sources of disturbance. The car alarm's proximity and volume seemed particularly disorienting. The bear took several steps away from the trampoline, then paused as if reconsidering its options. Marlo threw a potted plant from her windowsill toward the yard, though it landed well short of the bear. The movement and additional noise finalized the animal's decision. The bear turned and loped back toward the fence it had originally climbed. It cleared the barrier with surprising agility and disappeared into the wooded area beyond. Marlo immediately called emergency services while rushing back outside to check on Percival. He remained conscious but had sustained significant injuries. His left calf showed deep bite wounds with arterial bleeding that required immediate pressure. His forearm bore multiple lacerations from the bear's claws, and he had developed signs of shock, including rapid breathing and disorientation. Emergency medical services arrived within 12 minutes. Paramedics stabilized Percival's leg with pressure bandages and started intravenous fluids before transporting him to the nearest hospital. He underwent surgery to repair damaged muscles, tendons, and blood vessels in his calf. The bite had torn through significant tissue and required extensive reconstruction. Percival survived the attack but faced a lengthy recovery period. His calf injuries resulted in permanent reduced mobility and chronic pain. The psychological impact proved equally significant as he developed severe anxiety about his backyard and required counseling to address trauma responses. Wildlife officials investigated the incident thoroughly. They identified the fermented cherries as the primary attractant and noted that the trampoline's elastic surface had prevented Percival from escaping or defending himself effectively. The bear's consumption of alcohol from fermenting fruit likely contributed to its unusually aggressive behavior and impaired judgment. Authorities never located the specific bear responsible, as tracking proved impossible once the animal retreated into extensive forest areas. The incident prompted neighborhood-wide education about wildlife attractants and proper fruit tree management in suburban areas where bears had become increasingly common.